CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Today, we've got Mark Mochel. He's Strategic Account Executive at Brightly. That's a Siemens company. And we're going to talk about healthcare, CMMS, infrastructure, and more. Mark, welcome to CMMS Radio.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be here. Good to see you again.
Yeah. And that's, we were just talking before we hit record, and you and I got to spend some time in Anaheim, California. This was in July, and, we had a nice conversation. Unfortunately, we can't record that one because it was just a natural thing, and I like to do that same thing here on CMMS Radio. You and I have been actually working on setting this up for quite some time, since well before that conference out in Anaheim. But
yes, we have.
Let's talk a little bit about that. So, when you and I were talking out at the, we were at the Healthcare Facilities Innovation Conference that's put on by ASHE, which is the American Society for Healthcare Engineering, and that talk we were having was just before you were about to take the main stage and essentially, give people insight as to why at the time you were a candidate for the advisory board. And just real quick, congratulations, because, the members, all these peers voted for you to be on the board for 2025. And I think that's good. So first I wanted to say congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And
it's been working on that for a while. It's a big goal personally. A lot of things. I know we're going to talk about that. I'm very excited. It's a great organization, and it's a great chance for me to support my network in the healthcare space. Just a lot of great people. So thank you for the shout out, Greg. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so, we know a couple of people in common, and some of those folks are over at Brightly, and I get to have conversations with them about you when it comes to healthcare and, the different places you go, the presentations that you give. And I want to ask you about that passion, that obvious passion, because like when we were talking at the conference in person, it's, I want to use a word like palpable. And it's because typically you can tell when somebody's just in there going through the motions as opposed to they're all about it. Where does that come from for you?
Wow, that's a great question. I could talk about that probably for hours there, but honestly, this is going to sound crazy. It is about the people, and it is about the industry. I got involved in healthcare about 10 years ago, and was part of starting a company called Facility Health Incorporated. And I know we talked about this a little bit in Anaheim. And we set out to solve a very specific problem. It related to infrastructure investment and helping facility leaders better quantify or document the investment needs, that the things they need for the infrastructure. And in the healthcare industry, we're competing. Infrastructure capital is competing with other things, IT and clinical assets and all of that. And the long story short is it's very difficult in healthcare and in other industries to defend the need to invest in the basic infrastructure. It doesn't generate the same types of return on investment that, say, an MRI or an ultrasound or radiology equipment might. But bringing it back to the passion, Greg, it started out as, hey, we wanted to do a better engineering, provide a better engineering assessment. And we developed some technology that we'll be talking about to enhance traditional CMMS capabilities and looking at the capital planning. But through the years, a good friend of mine, Brian Crum, who was part of starting the company, we were going hospital to hospital. And I've literally been in hundreds of hospitals, and he had been a facility director for years. And I started to meet these people, the men and women that are working in the basements, in the boiler rooms, in the mechanical spaces, working so hard to keep these hospitals up and running. And so it became a very personal passion for me, well beyond the business, well beyond the software. I just saw a need to help. And through the years, I kind of learned more about the industry, started to develop a lot of relationships through American Society of Healthcare Engineering and with a lot of non-facility leadership. So it all goes back to the mission of healthcare. We're all consumers of the healthcare system in one way or the other, and so it's just very personal to me. I don't know how else to say it. It's about what can we do with CMMS systems or with infrastructure planning. But the business value is we're helping people run these hospitals. And I'd like to think out there somewhere that we're helping save lives by making sure that these facilities are well run, well documented, and safe for all the patients and staff. So it's told you it was a big answer, Greg. It is a passion for sure, for sure.
Yeah, and that's it's not always easy to answer a question like that when, where does that come from? I've been put on the spot like that before, and it's not to really put you on the spot, but more to kind of see what happens when you kind of let go and start explaining it. People can kind of see it and feel it. That's why I said palpable. And a lot of folks throughout industry, they're there, they might be passionate, but sometimes they're just doing their job as opposed to something that's a little bit more like vocation. And this is where I also kind of look and see, like with you in particular, going many places, doing all these things. You're obviously, you're dealing with the software side of things from, when you're wearing your Brightly hat, but at the same time, you're also trying to help the entire industry, essentially agnostic of that. And people only do that, in my view. I don't know if I'm right, but they only do that when the passion is real and there's kind of an imperative behind it. There's a lot of intentionality behind it. So you touched a little bit on mentioning infrastructure, and I've gone through some of the data that you had shared with me previously, and I want to be really careful because I like low prep, no prep. So I don't want to spit out any facts or figures or anything like that. I'll leave that to you. But when it comes to the infrastructure needs and the fact that it seems to be a fact that criticality is less of a heuristic. They don't necessarily look at criticality when they defer maintenance, and the deferred maintenance is where the infrastructure gets potentially the most exposure to failures. And it's almost like an ideal way to make sure you don't save lives at some point if we want to attach it to something that powerful. So can you talk to me a little bit about what you've seen and why this is happening, and what people might be missing out there when it comes to, hey, bring that criticality back in, the criticality and impact in how you decide to defer maintenance. Talk to us about that, please.
Yeah, great question, and I'll tie this answer back to the first question, because for me it's all one and the same. And I think some years ago when I was out on the road and starting to tour and my friend Brian, we'd walk out of a hospital and I'm like, wow, I can't believe how much they're struggling. The facility teams are struggling to get the attention of the non-facility leadership as to why this investment is so critical. And he would always look at me and say, well, yeah, I told you that's kind of how it is. But I had somebody along the way. It was kind of a pivotal moment, probably 2018. And it was a facility leader who's a dear friend as well. And he said, Mark, you're saying the same things that everybody else. The problems are well known, but you're telling the story in a different way. And you're somehow able to communicate that in a different way. And it ties back to risk and criticality that you just talked about. This is going to be a little stereotypical, so I want to be careful, but a lot of the facility leadership in not just healthcare, but in a lot of industries, it's people who grew up in the trades, people who grew up with, it's an engineering acumen. And that's necessary for obvious reasons. But when you start to get in front of a CFO of a healthcare system, we have to translate those engineering needs into business needs. And that translation of, air handler 21. Well, who cares about air handler 21? What's an air handler? But air handler 21 serves operating rooms 1 through 4. And it provides the test and balance, the pressurization, the temperature and humidity controls that are required to safely perform medical procedures. So now if I'm talking to a clinician or to a CFO, now I could say, do I have your attention now? Well, air handler 21 means nothing, but providing a safe and stable environment of care, which is actually, providing a sterile field for a surgeon to do an operation in a hospital. Now we're talking, right? Now we're talking about real business need and real patient need, because that air handler, yes, it's just a box with some fans and a coil, but it's part of a system that actually provides infection control for the space that it serves. So I think the best answer to your question, and I coach all of my healthcare clients, let's take those assets that you're managing in your system, let's connect those assets to the spaces they serve. And now we've hopefully we've created a decoder ring to translate, asset management into business value and ultimately patient care. And that is something that hopefully, right, the clinicians, the administrators, and the facility people are all trying to provide the same thing, and that is high quality patient care. So I think that risk and criticality is so key. And look at what we learned in the pandemic. Airborne pathogens. Look at what happened in hospitals as we had to actually reconfigure HVAC systems to deal with the need for more isolation spaces and so on. So, a lot of takeaways from the pandemic. But in my view of the world, it was a perfect study of why that criticality is so important when we look at the design, the construction, and the maintenance of our healthcare facilities. Well, so another big answer to your question.
And it's good though, because when you talk about, and I'm a generalist, right? And I kind of like being a generalist because it means I can ask a bunch of questions, I can stay curious, I can kind of know a little bit, but I don't know everything, and that's why I like having experts in here to help with that. So when you tie it all together, and you are tying it all together with the different departments, how they see, view, and move through facilities, the assets within, the assets without, even some of the things that are external to the building, appurtenances on the property, they're all going to have their own levels of criticality and impact to the business operation, in addition to the patient outcomes. But as people are moving through their day-to-day, their week-to-week, they certainly lose sight of that for moments, of time, right? They're not walking through, heading to repair or do some air diversion within an HVAC system and thinking, God, I hope the CFO really likes what I'm doing. They're not doing that, but that's what each of them, they all have a purpose and they want to do great work. So when we talk about the criticality and speaking this language that they can all understand, do you see more progress of late, let's say within the last couple of years, with finance and business operations starting to quote unquote see maintenance as less than a cost, as more of something that is an investment that does provide that return? Is that improving at least a little bit?
I think it is, and I think it's there's two competing forces here. So I do think we're getting better at it as an industry, and I'd like to take. For myself, I'd like to believe maybe I'm a little part of that change. I obviously, following up on the earlier questions, but the competing force is the reality of the economics. So, and I will tie this directly to the pandemic. Starting back in 2016, 2017, the American Society of Healthcare Engineers, for example, started publishing information about infrastructure and deferred maintenance and the need to improve that investment. So there's momentum there. The pandemic comes along, and for obvious reasons, there was a huge impact in healthcare. But even financially, a lot of capital projects were halted. Capital was frozen. So we went through a period of, say, 2 to 3 years where there was the investment levels before the pandemic were insufficient. During the pandemic, they were pulled back even further. And if I look at the data that we're tracking, that deferred maintenance number that we talked about, we saw the deferred maintenance levels increase significantly over that same period of time. And it was a direct reflection of, the reality of the times. Post-pandemic, with all the other macroeconomic forces, the supply chain issues, the inflation, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a spiral, right? A negative spiral. As we increase our attention, as we have better data, we can track this deferred maintenance. We can communicate that. But at the same time, there still are real economics at play. And a lot of healthcare organizations, particularly in the rural space, are struggling financially just to stay open and stay operate in operational mode. So, I can sit down and talk with a CFO all day long. You need $10 million, $20 million, whatever. And sometimes they look at me and they say, we understand, but we just don't have the money. So now we have a bigger problem to solve. How do we help people get access to money? That's a little bit beyond my area of expertise. But I think, yes, it's becoming more and more clear, but it's a big, big dollar figure, Greg, for many organizations. So it's a problem we're going to have to figure out as an industry and as a country, for that matter. And so I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does, and a lot of times when we ask these questions, it's not. We might not be providing ultimate resolution to the question or the problem at hand that the question seeks to address. It's right. To keep the conversations going, to potentially inspire more critical thinking. And so, like, some interesting things you've said there, one of which is where I was thinking about as you were saying it. Well, we have all of this awareness, and then we know what needs to be done, but we can't. We don't have those resources, and we're trying to create those resources. And what we start to see is how everything is actually connected, which on one hand is cliche, but on the other hand, it's such a, I'm going to say, truism that we have to stay in that space in hopes of finding these real solutions. So when it comes to the infrastructure investment needs and how the deferred maintenance, I had some notes here and I put on there, deferred maintenance is I put big in really big letters problem, because when maintenance is deferred in just about any scenario, but especially something like healthcare facilities, skilled nursing, on and on like this, we go down line through that deference period, and what's actually going to happen, it builds its own momentum. So when it comes to bite you, it's a hard bite. Like, we don't see it. We feel like it's business as usual, while in the meantime, the degradation of assets, asset performance, and so forth is really adding up. And so we take this awareness and we don't have the resources, but are there some things that are being done that you know of to find that money? Does it get found within a state? Does it get found with other organizations, or do they have to move things around within their system to say, hey, we're going to rob Peter to pay Paul?
Yeah, it's great question. It's a little bit of both, in the sense that as organizations, as the awareness increases, and this ties back into the basis of the data, right? Through our CMMS systems, through our capital planning solution, Origin, we have now data that we can better direct to the non-facility leadership, and we know where the money needs to be spent. That's the first thing. So in some cases, organizations are starting to take a more strategic view. Instead of looking at these capital budgets as a one-year budget cycle, let's look 3, 5, or even 10 years. and be more strategic. And then the organizations have more options if they're moving money around, if they're moving their own money around. That longer view helps. Now, a lot of healthcare organizations, they use the bond market to raise money. There are other options. I work for Siemens, or a division of Siemens. Siemens and other large vendors have financing options. That's one way to go. There are state and federal programs, PACE programs, CPACE. These are different funding mechanisms that organizations can tie into. Many utility companies offer rebates and incentives for organizations, not just healthcare, but organizations to invest in more energy efficient solutions. I was talking with a good friend of mine this week. HUD has a program, federal money. There's money available, but here's the cool part where this comes together. It takes data, and it takes a lot more information to access those funds. So think of underwriting a mortgage. You have to have the documentation in place. And that's where these two worlds will come together. The historic investment, going back a decade is, here's my Excel spreadsheet. Here's the 10 projects I want to fund next year. Well, now it's just a debate with the CFO. But if we have the data that we can go forward and give the CFO the information they need, maybe we can incorporate those capital projects into a bond issuance. Maybe we can tie it to alternative financing. Maybe we can apply it to a federal program. But again, it all comes back to the data. We can't just say, hey, I need $1 million for Air Handler 21. We have to, we need $1 million for this program. We're going to tie it to energy reduction. We're going to use that as a part of a sustainability play. We have to repackage these needs into, again, business cases that we can then use to submit for that higher level financing. So it's a more complicated play than maybe how we used to fund these things traditionally. Does that make sense?
It does. And so my first learning about Origin was when I was at Brightly Illuminate back in March 2024. Yeah. And Patrick and Corey Dickens jumped in with us too while we were there, and we were talking about it. So getting back to the way you were describing it, it seems to me almost everyone knows, and they want to say, yeah, I need $1 million to fix this. Let's go. And it just doesn't work that way. We wish it did sometimes, but you have to have you have to substantiate what is being requested or even what's being expected. So everybody needs these tools and access to this data in a format that's useful, credible, verifiable. And as you were describing it, I was thinking, well, what if there's someone that is, say doing grant writing to find this money through various philanthropic groups or people that want to support a local hospital? They're going to need data, and you can't just make it up. So Origin would be a way to grab, pull, monitor, track, and present these data points rather than massaging the situation. You can take anecdotal situations and tie them directly to the data that's actually involved. And that's some of the stuff that I learned about Origin. But am I getting that right?
Yeah, you nailed it. And I'll tell you, this is going to sound cliche, but cliches come from reality. But the simple example we like to use in the healthcare space is, a facility director approaches the capital committee and I need $1 million to replace an air handler. A clinician or a doctor comes in and says, I need $1 million for a new MRI machine. The MRI is going to get funded all day long because the MRI has a higher return on investment. Well, in traditional accounting means it's true because I can bill patients against that MRI. So it's a revenue generating asset. Now, the air handler that provides the temperature and humidity controls in the MRI suite is a cost. That's part of the cost center of facilities. And so we're coming back to that risk and criticality. Well, I can't run that MRI if I don't have a climate controlled space to do it in. So the air handler will lose the ROI battle all day long against a revenue generating asset. So to your point, we're not only reframing the description of the problem, but we're reframing the how we package that data to raise awareness that I don't want to compete with an MRI. I want to come alongside that MRI, and let's look at that as a system. Because if I tell you an air handler is more important than an MRI, if you're a CFO of a healthcare system, you're probably going to throw me out of the office. But if I retell the story and say, hey, look, we're making this investment in this MRI. Let's make this investment as well. Let's invest in the system, the MRI system or the MRI suite, however you want to say that, because we can't do clinical procedures without a facility. So this idea that the facility is a cost center that generates no revenue, but the MRI does generate revenue. We're telling the story in a whole different way, but this is a big change in the industry. And that's probably tying it back to my mission of, I actually think I can help change that. And we'll see if that's true over the next couple of years. But does that resonate with you? I think it ties into your question,
It does. And what you'll notice is I start like thinking and I start beaming and I get a little bit emotional about it because I love that stuff. I used to sell software. I was in the business and all that, but I love these ideas about how we can actually solve problems and tie it all together. Sometimes it's cliches, sometimes it's pie in the sky, but what's important to me is that it's a real thing, that it's not BS. And what I mean by that is this idea that the HVA system, the air handling unit that serves, MRI suite 101C, wherever it is in the hospital, it is there to empower the MRI itself and the people running the MRI, and it's going to go to the doctor and it's about that patient and all those things. And yes, we know it's a big money thing and all that kind of stuff, like a big machine, but it reframes appropriately, not just to get these approvals and make it seem like something. It's an actual thing. This is where we get back to that everything's connected type thing. And I think when it comes to what you're going to do, moving forward and, with the board appointment, I like to call it that if it's okay.
Yeah.
That I know at least a couple of people that are going to want to help and going to want to, get some of your messaging out there on a regular basis and understand how this we got to keep it out there. Cause I think people are getting it, but it's not like lifting up my coffee cup. It's like lifting up a mountain. And how do you lift up a mountain? You don't. It takes, incredible resources to even build anything. So this is all good stuff. And I understood some of this about Origin, and I definitely want to get into that more. And I know, some of the data you shared, we can't talk directly about that, but the numbers are big. It's very substantial. What I want to do is, I want to move us into two things. One, benchmarking and how Origin plays a role in that benchmarking. And then two, I'd love to hear your take on the people, the process, and the culture within these facilities, these organizations being a first and software being layered in throughout.
Great question. You're serving them up in perfect order for me. So, talking about the deferred maintenance, and I don't even know if I answered that clearly before. It's a huge number, and I think it's important to note. We didn't just end up here in like the last 1 or 2 years. I talked about the pandemic. The pandemic was the period at the end of a sentence of decades of this trend of what I'm calling underinvestment, and that's data that's been published by multiple organizations. So it's. We're not going to solve it in 1 year. It took us 20 years to get here. So I think that's part of this slow moving wheel. But it's very important to me first to define deferred maintenance. And my definition of deferred maintenance are assets that have exceeded industry expected useful life and should be considered for replacement. So I'm always quick with customers and with executive leaders in healthcare. we're not in a panic situation, right? An air handler that's 25 years old versus an industry expected useful life of 20 years, it may be perfectly good. We may not need to replace that, but we know it's 25 years old. So let's look at the data and let's make informed decisions about what we should replace and what we shouldn't. And that comes to the cultural piece. Different health systems are at what I call different levels of maturity. So and that's the cultural piece. You have some organizations that are very progressive. They have made investments over the last decades in optimizing their maintenance management systems, preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance, reliability centered maintenance. They're moving farther down the path in terms of being more progressive. And then I see some organizations that, for whatever reason, are still in that firefighting mode. They're very reactive. We call it run to fail. That is their maintenance strategy. Let's run to fail, and when it breaks, we'll fix it. Well, that's a very, very inefficient spend. And so that's, again, part of this messaging is we're going to spend money on the facilities anyway. Emergent spend or reactive spend is the least efficient. So why don't we think about spending that money in a more proactive and in a planned way? And I think the best way to think about that is, if I have a chiller plant, right, and those chillers fail, we will move heaven and earth to replace those chillers as quickly as possible to get the hospital back up and running, right? Because now the ROI just went to infinity because I can't do surgeries without chillers, right? And so, but when we do that, we're spending anywhere from 2 to 10 times the amount of money to replace those chillers in an emergent situation. And we're going to replace them like for like. We're going to do anything we can. But now we're going to live with those chillers for another 30 years, which means we've lost the opportunity to engineer a better solution, to look at more advanced technologies, to get high efficiency chillers, heat recovery chillers. There's so many things we can do with a planned replacement that will provide economic benefits for decades to come. We can lower our energy cost. If decarbonization is part of the mission for the organization, we can change our carbon footprint, but it's going to take planned investment. So I kind of took your question and pivoted in a couple of different ways, but I think that's the cultural aspect of, well, let me tie it this way. What I'm proposing in using the origin data to make these more informed decisions, it's almost more of a cost avoidance than it is a cost savings. Meaning we have to use this, we have to make investments so that we can be more efficient in the future. And that's probably the hardest part of this whole thing we're talking about is, what's the value of a failure that never happens? Mm. If we manage the facility properly and nothing ever fails, well, if it didn't happen, then how do we document the benefit of that? Are you tracking with me?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting way to look at it, but a hospital that never has a failure, that doesn't mean we're spending too much money on facility operations. It means the facility operations team is doing their job. We're not supposed to have failures, if you know what I mean. So that I probably took you around the circle there 3 times there, but it really speaks to the challenge of selling not only the origin solution, but selling the concept of what that type of solution can do for the industry, because we're selling something that's going to avoid, hopefully prevent a lot of these failures. And once they don't happen, they become invisible. Does that make sense?
It does, because so you brought up RCM. I love that, because so many people might think reliability centered maintenance is not something that applies to a facility like that. They're always thinking manufacturing, and it's like, well, wait a minute, take a little step back. What's the difference? And I'll leave it at that. I like that. I like this idea that it's not necessarily about selling the origin solution. It's about leveraging the origin solution to bring this into these environments to further empower them. And at the end of the day, if we're doing better and better and better, constant process improvement, we're
Mm-hmm.
making strides on our maintenance maturity journey. Maybe you're at a level 3 when there's a total of 5 levels, and you're just really good at level 3, and you just get better and better at that before you go to level 4. Maybe you never have to.
Mm-hmm.
That's the name of the game. And you have to play it in a way where you're winning, and you have to put yourself in a position to win as
Yes.
facilities engineers. It could be environmental services. It could be, just something as simple as risk categorization mitigation from a JCO perspective. In and of itself, I've always told people for many years, if you can just leverage that and meet your
Yeah.
benchmarks there, for example, hitting your 95% plus PMs on that risk category of asset, MRI or otherwise, right? Meaning an
Yeah.
MRI machine, CT machine, a building asset.
Mm-hmm.
Those are in place for a reason, because when those are going good like that, we think all the other outcomes are going to be pretty strong as well, like safety, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all tied together. I keep saying that 5 times during this
Yeah.
episode. Now, if it's all right, I want to switch you to what I call the fun question segment for
Yeah.
first time CMMS radio guests. You ready?
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah. No wrong answers here. We just want this for people to get to know you a little bit better. First
Yeah, sure.
question, Mark, what is your favorite music?
Favorite music? Oh man, I'm gonna date myself here a little bit. I love the hair bands of the '80s.
Nice.
I on Spotify. My wife always gives me a hard time. She did kind of more of the new wave stuff, but I'm old school. I'm always listening to hair bands radio and all the good stuff from the '80s. So
Yeah. I could rattle off all those bands, man.
yeah,
I'm into it too.
yep,
And
yep,
that's why I say no wrong answers, man. No wrong answers. So I can do this. I love doing that.
yeah. There you go.
All right.
There you go.
Fun question number 2. What is your favorite sport or hobby? And on sport, you don't have to necessarily play it. It could be one you like to watch and, kind of root for.
I love watching the NFL. That's probably my go-to. I watch a little bit of basketball, a little bit of baseball, but I'm a diehard Colts fan. I grew up in Indianapolis. Got to experience the Peyton Manning years. So I love the NFL. On a personal level, I try to, when I have time, I try to do a lot of cycling. I used to do triathlons and even run marathons and stuff. The old knees won't let me do that anymore. But my wife and I try to get out and do some. If you've ever heard of gravel cycling, so it's not quite mountain biking, but we try to stay off the main roads. So the gravel biking is a fun thing that we like to do when we have time.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Here's the big
Yeah.
one.
Oh
Number
boy.
3.
Yeah.
What is your philosophy, perspective, opinion, anything at all on the concept of work-life balance?
Ooh, the concept and the reality. I think for me, they're probably a little out of whack. Meaning, I'm because I'm so passionate about my work, I never really step away from it. But I do think it's absolutely important. I travel a lot on the road, as you know. I love that aspect of it, but I do think it's absolutely important to carve out that time and make sure that for me personally, I'm giving that same focus to my family and my friends. I think I could do better at that. I'm going to be honest with you, but I love what I do, so it's hard for me to separate myself from what I do. In some cases is who I am, and I think that ties back to the passion that we started the session with. I love it. I love the people that I work with. I love my family. I wish there was more time to love them all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the thing with this is there's no wrong answers because everybody's doing it differently. Everybody's got their
Yeah.
own unique experiences, and that's gonna be relatable for somebody. It's gonna resonate somewhere, and
Yeah.
it's to have a little bit of fun. I don't just want this to be some boring conversation that people listen to, and if they are bored, they're not listening anymore. So I can keep talking. It's we're having a
Yeah.
little bit of fun here with something that's actually really serious, and
Yeah.
if those two things exist, in the same thing that you do day in and day out, pretty solid. I mean, it doesn't mean you're not going to have problems and challenges and all that kind of stuff, and it's going to get out of balance or out of whack or disruptive. But, if it does, and you've got that passion and motivation, you can carry forward. And there's a lot of strategies for that. So it's helpful to somebody. And I say, if we're helping one person at a time, we're still helping everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think, the kind of some of the takeaways from this conversation, I love this, Greg. I hope you'll have me back. I'd love to continue talking more. From a business perspective, talking about the infrastructure piece, to me, the data is what's going to bring all this together. The software solutions that we have and that everybody else has, those are mechanisms to make that data more visible. But the change, and you just said something, I love it, and I'm just going to restate it. I would like to believe that somehow over the last 10 years, the work that I've been doing, if a customer was able to do something to improve a facility and it saved somebody's life, I'll never know it. And I'm okay that I won't ever know that. But I'd like to believe that we're making a bigger impact than just what we see at the transactional level. It's pretty cool stuff. And I'm excited to be a part of the change. I really appreciate your support. You've been helping me spread the message. And, like I said, I hope together we can make a difference, man.
Thank you, man. I mean, that's what we want to do. And
yeah,
that's awesome stuff. So everybody out there that sees this, listens to this, you can find Mark on LinkedIn. It's Mark, M-A-R-K, and it's Mochel, M-O-C-H-E-L. You'll find him there on LinkedIn. A few other ways you can find him, but just start there. If you're not sure, call me. Reach out to me. I'll help you get in touch with them. And yes, we're definitely going to be doing this some more, Mark. And I just want to thank you for finally being on CMMS Radio.
Thank you for having me. There we go. We got it, brother. Well, thanks a lot, man. I hope to see you again really soon. And be well, my friend.
You too, Mark. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, man.
Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit cmmsradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.